Small twig shoots and stuff, hedge. That's the way it goes. They just go. Potentilla shrubs, which not always everybody's favorite shrub, but you do see them around quite a bit. And they're one that actually likes to bloom on a little bit more mature wood. So that's one plant that I usually don't prune every year. I only prune about every third year or something because it blooms better. But that's pretty much one of the only variations. A little bit of understanding as well about shrubbery is that you'll get those early blooming ones that bloom first thing in the spring, and then you get the ones that bloom in the summer. You got to kind of have an understanding of that before you prune. For Salvias, the yellow ones are blooming very early. I mentioned spireas, but what I was really talking about was summer blooming spireas. There's white ones, all the bridal wreath families and all those ones that bloom really early. Well, if we trim them off in the spring, we eliminate all their flowers, right? Because what happens is plants that bloom early in the spring, their buds are set in the summertime in August, right? So we have to preserve that plant all the way through the winter into the spring. We can always do this selective removal routine, right? So we can selectively remove, keep it looking tidy, and let it do its thing and bloom out. So then all the buds that are on here are overwintering flower buds. And then first thing in the spring, away they go, they pop and bloom. So one way you can tell with spireas is they're typically white. Most of those white bridal wreath styles or garden spireas are all early blooming, so we have to wait till after they bloom before we prune them. And in that case, again, if it's a fine branching type, you can hedge trim the thing right down, let it grow back, as long as it can go through the summer and develop buds for the next year. Summer blooming stuff, there's tons of things that bloom in the summer, like the pink spireas typically, and the like even a hibiscus, the rose of Sharon is a summer blooming shrub. And what they do is they'll bloom on any new growth. So it doesn't matter when you prune them, as long as they get new growth, they're going to bloom. So that's where, again, learning the plants a little bit, right? So that you know what you're dealing with. If I go into a property, I'd probably have a little pruning technique for every species of plant. But for on average, these are really all we really need to know is it bloom in the spring or the summer? And if it blooms anywhere like, say, May or earlier, it's pretty much a spring bloomer. So then we have to let it bloom out, and then we trim it after it blooms and cut off dead heads and that sort of thing. So sometimes on some of the bigger spireas, they'll bloom out in May, and then in June, they're very dead flowers. So that's where using a hedge trimmer just to take off those little light dead blossoms and dead finished flowers. You can just hedge trim really lightly, but we're trying not to go in and cut a branch off. As soon as we cut a branch partway along, we get an instant response, which is it grows about 6 or 7 shoots off the end of that. So if you ever know of places where you've hedge trimmed or it's been hedge trimmed for years, you get this mat of branches on the outside of the tree. And then every one of these things, right, ends up being, having antler on it. And we call them antlers. So we cut off a branch and every little shoot grows around it. They're all poor branch attachments. And there's really not much you can do about it. Every year you cut it back to that. You can't go beyond that because it's just, there's nothing inside. Right? There's no light inside. Yeah. So the whole inside of the bush goes. So this is not a normal sort of thing. So we're just trying whenever possible. It's not to cut the end off a branch if we don't have to. If we had a couple on a bush, it's not a problem. But if we see this on a tree, if it's an ornamental, this is normal for like fruit trees, right? Fruit trees, everybody cuts the ends off, they tip them, they trim them back, and then they branch and they get tons of these antlers on them and they sucker all over the place. Now, it's normal for a fruit tree because every year we're going to go in and clean them up and cut them all off again. But on an ornamental tree, if you go to a maple tree or something that somebody's done this, from an arborist point of view, they go, well, that's damaged wood. It's one of the 3Ds, so it's got to go. So you see whole trees that have been destroyed by incorrect pruning techniques. And we go and if it's not been destroyed too badly, we can go, okay, well, just like I said on the older shrubs, is I'll take out a piece here, a piece there, let it grow back, train some new branches in. The next year, take another one out. A year down the road, maybe 2 years down, take another 2 out. And you slowly replace those branches that have these, knobs on the end of them that are all like antlers. So the general rule of thumb is maintain constant taper. So this is what we're talking about here. It's like you look at this tree over here. No, just kidding. You're looking at that tree, so that looks like a tree. It's not a tree. You have a tree that has branches on it, and basically the tree is thick at the base, and you have a nice root flare there, which we've talked about. But the tree itself is fat at the bottom, and then each branch goes all the way up to the top gradually getting thinner and thinner and thinner, that constant taper until it comes right off the end of the branch. As soon as we've done this effect, hacked off those branches, there's no more constant taper. So this is okay on a fruit tree, but not on an ornamental tree. Again, once you cut the end off, it's considered damaged wood and it needs to be removed. So when I go to prune the ornamental trees, it's great. Get in there, start taking out the dead stuff, take out the disease stuff. Here's the one that the homeowner could reach with his saw, and he cut the ends off, and those ones are all branching out. So I go in and remove those, right? I get rid of anything that's been damaged, and then let the tree come back and develop its, put its focus into the good positive wood. So constant taper is one of the keys. That's one of the more important aspects. And all right, yeah. So there's different types of trees that you have to be a little bit aware of. Is that basic general shapes of trees tell you a little bit about the tree. So if a tree has sort of a broad, wide shape, it doesn't have any apical dominance. An apical dominance is when the tip of the tree is dominant to the rest of the branches below it, meaning that the other branches are never going to catch up to the tip. So it's conical in shape. Little leaf lindens, pyramidal hornbeams, blue spruces, any of the most all conifers have a central leader, and it's conical. So it's the apex is dominant. So this type of a tree does not have apical dominance. It's just a tree. It's just growing in broad shape. And the reason that that's important is that trees that have sort of an apical dominance is you have to maintain that central leader all.
It's like a columnar type. Anything that's columnar would probably be.
Yeah, that's exactly columnar. But even, with blue spruces are pretty columnar.
Yeah.
They're kind of a broad columnar shape. And, but, pines vary a little bit. Not really. But spruces, yeah, they're columnar, but conical in shape. So that these branches are not shading the branches below them. But whenever you cut the end off of apical dominant stems, like if you cut the top off a blue spruce, right, it's pretty much done. Then it starts to branch out and it forms these multiple shoots. And every time you cut a branch off, like in this case, whether it's a conifer or whatever it is, as soon as you do make that cut, what happens is it branches out and sends this antler thing that goes on. But everywhere those branches attach are weak branch attachments. So you just grab those branches, pull on, and they would just snap right off. So a weak branch attachment is fine when it's like 6 feet long, but when it's 36 feet long, 10 years from now, that's a potential dangerous tree, right? Those branches break off in windstorms and fall and hit people. So the key with that is again, that when we have trees, most trees you want to maintain a strong central leader, even in a tree like this initially. Maple trees, all deciduous trees, you kind of start them out saying, okay, let's keep one central leader growing. And if it's got two, that's called codominant leaders. We'll generally take one of them out when it's young and keep it going just with one and let it grow into a nice tree. And if it grows again and it gets this kind of an effect, let's take one of them out. And this effect is steep crotch, and the crotch is very tight together, develops a problem that's called included bark. And if you have a look in this one, you'll see that there's the bark in that one, there's an actual hole inside there. And water would sit in there. No, I'll show you what the deal is with that. But you notice on this one that there's a ridge in here. Okay. That's a bad branch attachment because it's got included bark in it. This has got a ridge in it. So if you got a ridge, that means it's a good branch attachment. These are two good branch attachments. This is a pretty steep angle crotch, but you can see the ridge in here, this ridge bark. That means that those are good solid branch attachments. Basically what happens is in a branch like that, what happens is you get this thing called included bark. So the tree starts growing up, but what happens is the bark is growing from inside. So the bark is actually inside the tree. And as the bark grows, it actually starts to grow inside the tree. And it's alive and it's producing wood, not as much on the outside, but it actually starts to force that tree apart. It creates a real weakness. So this was an example here of included bark. And you can see when that tree there was together, it had included bark. And if somebody would have saw it when it was young and take one branch out, it would have been fine, But as soon as they let it go, it creates a real weakness. And you can see inside, that there's actually bark growing down inside. And when you get bark, you've got an actual split down the center of that tree. So you can walk up to any tree and you see, oh, codominant leaders, that's a warning sign. You see any tree, it's going to break. It's going to split like this for sure. Pretty much 100% of the time. It's just, is it going to be tomorrow or 20 years down the road? But we know that's a bad tree. So we see guys, I go to landscape jobs all the time and I go and looking at, oh, these guys planted these trees like 2 years ago. And I look at them and we're like, well, who's managing it? Because they've all got included bark. You got to cut that out like now, right? Before they become 20, 30 feet long and break into pieces. So this is in nature. This is the way, this happens all the time. But in our backyards, you're not allowed to let this happen, right? So when the bark grows down inside, it literally, over time, it will force that thing apart. These guys are about 25 feet long, at least, above this point. And there's a lot of weight there. So included bark, that's the reason there. Right? That's considered damaged wood, even when it's in this state. I have a tree like this, and I know that's got to go. So I can tell good pruners, right? If you're a good pruner, I go along behind you and I don't have to cut that off, right? Because somebody goes, oh, well, the bark goes right down inside. So this, like now this is dried, it's hard as a rock, but I could still snap that pretty easily. But on an outdoor tree, you just put a little pressure on them. It's green, snap, rip down the side of the tree, get a big wound, then you get disease issues. So if you have a bark ridge, that's the symptom, right? That's what you're looking for. Ridge bark. That means it's solid, relatively stable. So that's one of the most important things. Again, when you're looking at a tree, you're going to prune it, is you're going to selectively look at the trees. When you have a young tree and you're starting out, you're definitely going to eyeball this when you're planting it, right? During the planting procedure, especially you get a tree that's 15 feet long in a pot or something, and you lay it on the ground, you go along and cut those all out before you even stand it up, because you can see, where those bad branch attachments are. And always take the ribbon off, because when you stand it up, you can't get the ribbon off afterwards, right? So